"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." The ballroom fell quiet in a ring around them. White tablecloths, crystal stemware, 600 people in formal dress, most of them mid-sentence, mid-sip, mid-laugh. And now this, a security officer in a rented tuxedo jacket with a hand placed on the arm of the only black man near the door. "You heard me. Let's go." Marcus Ellison looked at the hand on his arm, then at the face attached to it. Then, slowly, around the room at the 600 people who had just discovered something more interesting than their conversations. "I wasn't aware there was a problem," Marcus said. His voice did not rise, his posture did not change. He made a quiet, methodical note of the pressure on his arm, the unauthorized contact, the lack of identification, the absence of any stated cause. "There's no problem," the officer said. "There's just you, and there's the exit." He steered Marcus toward the door. A woman in gold earrings raised an eyebrow and went back to her wine. A man in a gray tuxedo turned to his companion and said something low and satisfied. A young catering staffer near the kitchen entrance watched and did not move and felt something she would think about for the rest of the evening. Marcus walked. His hands were visible. His head was level. He did not resist. He had no idea that what he was carrying in the left breast pocket of his jacket was going to end 3 careers by morning, and in 47 minutes, this ballroom was going to have a very different kind of silence in it. But this story doesn't start here. Rewind 11 hours. Marcus Ellison, 54, had been seated in his study at 6:47 that morning reviewing the draft that would finalize a $2.3 billion federal infrastructure settlement. The settlement, 7 years in the making, was the centerpiece of his tenure as Chief Counsel of the United States Department of Transportation's Office of General Counsel, a position he had held for 9 years and prepared for across 3 decades of federal law practice. He had argued infrastructure liability before the Fifth Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, and the D.C. Circuit. His name was on the masthead of 23 landmark rulings. He was, by any accounting that anyone in federal law would recognize, one of the most consequential infrastructure attorneys in the country. On his desk, beside the draft, was a photograph. Marcus at 31. The morning of his bar admission ceremony, standing with his father, a man named James Ellison, who had driven school buses for the city of Baltimore for 38 years, who had never owned a suit he hadn't bought secondhand, and who had pressed his best slacks the night before that photograph with the iron he'd had since Marcus was 7 years old. James died 14 months before Marcus argued his first federal case. The photograph stayed on every desk Marcus ever sat behind. That morning, Marcus was attending the evening's gala only as a courtesy. The Meridian Infrastructure Foundation Gala was an annual event, a gathering of transportation industry executives, federal agency leaders, and private capital firms held each year at the Grand Westmore Hotel in downtown D.C. Marcus had been invited as a keynote speaker. He had accepted 3 months earlier. His remarks were 7 pages, double-spaced, in the inside breast pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He was attending because the foundation's work genuinely mattered to him, and because, as he told his wife Cynthia before she kissed him on the cheek and told him to text when he arrived, he was only going to shake a few hands and come home early. He was not attending to be escorted out. Across town, Raymond Caulfield had been prepping for the same gala in a different way. Caulfield, 44, was head of contracted security for Meridian Event Solutions, the staffing firm that supplied security personnel to 3 major Washington venues, including the Westmore. He had been in private event security for 11 years, following a 7-year stint with the D.C. Metro Police Department, from which he had departed under an agreement that the department's Internal Affairs Division preferred not to discuss in writing. Caulfield had 3 formal complaints in his Metro PD file, all of which had been reviewed and dismissed. The first involved the aggressive removal of a black patron from a Capitol Hill restaurant at the request of a manager who had received no other complaints that evening. The second involved a stop and frisk of a black teenager outside a Georgetown pharmacy, a stop that produced no contraband and no charges. The third involved the verbal confrontation of a black attendee at a congressional reception, a confrontation that Caulfield escalated until a supervisor physically intervened. All 3 complaints were dismissed. One reviewer noted that Caulfield had 6 commendations for event management in the same period. He was, his supervisors had consistently said, extremely good at reading rooms and maintaining order. Raymond Caulfield arrived at the Westmore at 4 that afternoon. Marcus Ellison arrived at 7:45. He had barely crossed the ballroom when Caulfield began watching him. Marcus was doing what you do at a gala. He moved through the room. He shook hands. He accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. He found himself in a conversation near the windows with a deputy administrator from the Federal Highway Administration, and he was 3 minutes into a discussion about the Tennessee Valley Corridor when he saw Caulfield across the room. And he registered, without comment, without expression, that Caulfield had not moved since Marcus entered. He kept talking. He held his glass. He smiled at the deputy administrator's joke. The countdown in Marcus Ellison's mind had already begun. He was not unfamiliar with this. He was 54 years old. He had walked into rooms his entire life. He had read signals like Caulfield's since he was 12. He had learned to document everything, in his memory, in his notes, in the quiet professional record he kept, because his father had once said to him, "One day, somebody will say, it didn't happen the way you remember." And Marcus had decided, very young, that he would always be able to prove them wrong. When Caulfield finally crossed the room, Marcus saw him coming. He finished his sentence. He turned. "Sir," Caulfield's voice was level and practiced, "can I see your invitation?" "I wasn't asked for one at the door," Marcus said. "I'm asking now." Around them, the nearest cluster of guests had gone quiet. Marcus set down his glass. "My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm speaking tonight. You can verify with the Foundation's event coordinator. I believe her name is Patricia Chambers. I'll need you to step aside while I do that." "Absolutely." Caulfield steered him to the edge of the room. He made a show of pressing his earpiece. He made no call. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Marcus stood. He counted. He waited. At 12 minutes, Caulfield returned. "I'm going to have to ask you to step outside while we sort this out." "What is there to sort out?" "Have you spoken with Miss Chambers?" "We're working on it. I'd like to speak with her directly." "That's not how this works," Caulfield said. And he put his hand on Marcus Ellison's arm for the second time that evening, and he steered him toward the door, and the ballroom watched. And the woman in the gold earrings raised her eyebrow, and the man in the gray tuxedo leaned toward his companion. And then the doors opened from the outside. Eleanor Marsh walked in. Eleanor Marsh was the founder and executive director of the Meridian Infrastructure Foundation. She had started it 22 years earlier, with a grant, a borrowed conference room, and a conviction that the country's infrastructure deficit was a civil rights issue. She had grown it into the most respected infrastructure policy organization in Washington. She was the reason there were 600 people in this ballroom. She was the reason there was a ballroom. She had been delayed in traffic. She was not in a good mood. She came through the main doors at precisely the moment Caulfield's hand was on Marcus Ellison's arm, and she saw what she saw, and she went very still. Marcus turned. Eleanor Marsh walked past Raymond Caulfield without looking at him. She extended both hands to Marcus. "I am so sorry I'm late." She turned to the room, to the 600 people who had gone quiet, and she said, "Clearly and without theater, this is Marcus Ellison, our keynote speaker tonight. He is one of the most important infrastructure attorneys in the federal government and one of the finest people I know. And whoever authorized this removal needs to see me in the next 3 minutes." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Caulfield's face had changed. The color had drained from it with a specific completeness, not flushing, not reddening, just a draining, as if something had been pulled. He stepped backward. He touched his earpiece. He looked at the door. He looked back at Ellison. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Caulfield," Marcus said, "I'd like you to note that I've been in this room for 47 minutes. I've been asked for my invitation, steered to the edge of the ballroom, made to wait 12 minutes without contact or explanation, and twice subjected to physical contact I did not consent to. I've been counting since the first contact." He reached into his jacket pocket. He placed his speaking notes on the nearest table. "I'm not angry," Marcus said. "I want you to understand that. I'm not angry. But I want you to understand what just happened here, because the next person you do this to probably won't have Eleanor standing in the doorway." Caulfield said nothing. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Call your supervisor," Marcus said, and he turned back to Eleanor Marsh and straightened his jacket and said, "I believe I owe you a speech." The reckoning was not dramatic. It was systematic. Meridian Event Solutions suspended Caulfield before midnight. By the following morning, the video, taken by the catering staffer who had not moved from the kitchen entrance, had been shared 11,000 times. By the following afternoon, it had been viewed by 600,000 people, and the 3 complaint files from Caulfield's Metro PD record had been located, photographed, and attached to 37 different news stories. Caulfield was terminated by the end of the week. The former Metro PD captain who had buried the second complaint retired abruptly. An inquiry opened into the internal affairs review process for the third. The Meridian Foundation issued a public statement, drafted jointly by Eleanor Marsh and Marcus Ellison, that focused not on Caulfield specifically, but on the structural conditions that had placed him in that room. The failure, the statement read in part, is not one man at one event. The failure is every institution that told him this behavior was acceptable. Marcus testified before a D.C. City Council subcommittee 6 weeks later. He did not speak about himself. He spoke about the postal worker's son who would never be a federal attorney and who would never have Eleanor Marsh standing in the doorway. He spoke about what it costs a system, in talent, in trust, in human possibility, when it tells certain people that their dignity is conditional on their credentials. "I could have announced who I was," he said. "I chose not to. Because my title is not what entitled me to be in that room. My invitation was." He paused. "The next person won't have one of those either, and they still deserve to be treated like a human being." The $2.3 billion infrastructure settlement was finalized 8 weeks later. Marcus Ellison's signature was on it. He went home that night to Cynthia, who had dinner waiting, and they sat on the back porch for a while after, not saying much. Raymond Caulfield spent 4 months in litigation and settled a civil complaint. He is barred from contracted security work in the district. He works in logistics now, in a suburb, in a company that ships agricultural equipment. The catering staffer who filmed the video from the kitchen entrance is named Denise. She enrolled in a paralegal certification program that fall. She has not said publicly why. Eleanor Marsh added new vendor certification requirements to the Foundation's events contract. They focus on documented complaint histories. One bystander, the man in the gray tuxedo, sent an anonymous donation to a legal defense fund for wrongful removal cases. The note said only, "I should have said something." On Marcus Ellison's desk, the photograph of the boy in dress blues and the man with calloused hands and the proudest smile you have ever seen sat exactly where it always sat. Things were better than they had been at 8 o'clock that evening. They were not fixed. They were not close to fixed. "Someone has to be watching," Marcus said to Cynthia. She didn't answer right away. She held his hand. She looked out at the yard. "Then it's good it's you," she said. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think or remember something, or feel something you've been carrying for a long time, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like Marcus's don't travel on their own. We carry them for each other. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been in a room where someone decided who you were before you opened your mouth? What happened next? Subscribe for more stories that name the truth and honor the people who live it, because every person who sees this is one more witness. And witnesses are what changes things.